Hello and welcome to the August edition of the Organic Gardening Podcast. I'm Fiona Taylor and later on I'll be joined by my colleagues Chris Collins and Dr. Anton Rosenfeld. This month, we finally saw some rain here at Ryton. The garden is bouncing back from the impact of continuous heat waves and our water butts and wildlife ponds are filling back up nicely. Later on, we'll be joined by garden designer Juliet Sargeant. Juliet and I had a fascinating chat about what gardeners can do to combat soil degradation and how she favours a less is more approach when it comes to adding nutrients into your soil. We answer your questions on using banana peel water, no-dig gardening in raised beds, and whether or not it's safe to use washing up liquid in the garden. But before all that, I'm off to join Chris in the potting shed. Hello, Chris.
Hiya, Fiona, you all right?
I am fine, thank you. My goodness, what a summer it's been. Mad couple of months, but really exciting. How is your plot looking at the moment?
It's had a lot of love because of the heat and the dryness, the lack of moisture. I've really gone for it this year in terms of I've been getting up incredibly early in the morning, going down there, watering it before going to work. So it's kind of put an extra hour and a half on my working day, I suppose. I quite like doing it. I don't when I'm lying in bed, like the idea of getting out of bed and going to do it. But once I'm down there, I really enjoy that hour. It's that twilight, dawny hour.
Yeah.
And it's very beautiful. The birds are singing. But actually, that has paid off immensely by going down and irrigating and making sure everything's had a drink. The plot is absolutely stuffed full of plants, which are now starting to give up their bounty. But all of that hard work has been very, very much worth it.
Yeah, I mean, we should just mention, of course, hosepipe bans are beginning across various places. I've not had one where I am, but I don't know about you.
Well, I don't water the allotment with a hose anyway. Okay. So no, I don't water or the balcony. I much prefer direct water cans. The thing is with a hose is you stand away from the plants and you spray it or a sprinkler, and I think there's a disconnect there. Yeah. So when I water, I like to water the base of my plant, and when I'm watering that like that, I can then assess other things. As the plant got mildew, does it need picking over? You're more likely to notice those things if you're watering direct with a watering can. It takes more time. Mm. I think also with hose pipes as well, you feel like you've watered a lot, you spray everything down, but I think it's actually quite shallow watering. It's not deep watering.
Yeah.
And a lot of it ends up just transpiring anyway. So in a way, I don't think a hose pipe ban would affect me. It might do if you're a commercial grower or something like that. But otherwise, it's you ban away as far as I'm concerned.
I think that's a really interesting point. And I remember Sally Morgan saying this last year, that she doesn't water everything automatically. She goes around with a bucket and she sloshes on the plants that need it, and that means that you're not overwatering. It also means that you are observing, as you've just said. You can really see how a plant's doing. It puts you more in touch, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think watering is a really big skill for a gardener, and I think a lot of people get it wrong. I think a lot of people get it wrong, and you learn it when you work in the industry. If you're working in big greenhouses or out in the industry, you become very good at it because you're looking all the time. You're observing, which we always say it's a game of observation. And I just think that when you're watering direct, you've got skin in the game. I go from seed. I don't want to see it fail if I've gone from a tiny seed into a plant. But you build up a bond with it almost in a way. Yeah. So that's what watering does for me. And you are making all those calculations in your mind about what are the other requirements those plants need.
Yeah. And although you say it takes longer, I'm not sure it takes significantly longer. As you say, it's better. So it's more of an investment of that time.
Yeah, I think so. And I just think it's really pleasant way to set it. I'm just in a really good mood after it. And I go into my day with a smile. So that
goes a long way.
It does. And you're right. When no one wants to get out of bed when the alarm goes off because you're nice and comfortable. But once you're up and you're out of bed and you've got out the door, it's not an issue at all.
I mean, did you have any stage, though, during the last 6 weeks or so where you thought, oh, crikey, this really is getting a bit too dry? I'm a bit concerned.
Yes, it has. I mean, some things haven't done well. So certainly been a struggle for quite a lot of leafy crops. Spinach and stuff like that is just bolted straight away in the heat. So actually that's happened quite a few years running now. And I'm going to start sowing that stuff either earlier in the spring, in March, or then later So I'm going to try and miss out those hot early summer months, I think, because I'm not getting a result. But as one thing does struggle, other things like, I mean, I've got some amazing aubergines and they're just outside in the ground, no greenhouse required. It's going to be an absolute thumper year for tomato. They're all just starting to come now. And then I've had really good success. Any kind of legumes has been really good as well. But I think that's because I have kept the water on them. I have made that effort to water. So I've got melon, that's setting fruit, and I've got an incredible pumpkin, squash. Courgettes have been ridiculous this year. Last year I didn't get any courgettes because the slugs ate them all. And this is important message here: spread your bets. Because last year I didn't get any. This year they're like, the courgettes almost seem to be in a rush to make up for it.
Yeah, and I mean, comparing notes with gardening friends, this year seems to be much more the year of the aphid, whereas last year was very much the year of the... I mean, just to talk about aphids for a minute, I had an awful lot of them, particularly on my cabbages. I think my cabbages will recover, but there's two other brassicas that I just wanted to talk about and see what your opinion was, Chris. So one of them is a perennial kale, a Dorbenton kale, which is a wonderful big variegated bush. And also I've got a perennial broccoli. Now, what the aphids have done on these two plants, and bear in mind this is the first year for these two perennial plants, I put them in the spring, they have taken out the heart of both of those perennial plants, and I'm just not quite sure what's going to happen next.
Yeah, I'd stick with it. And I tend to notice with brassicas, particularly kales and broccolis actually, is they take a hell of a battering early in the season in the summer. And also they tend to be, they tend to be more comfortable in cooler climates, I think, is my observation. So they tend to really pick up as the autumn starts come towards.
Hey.
So I would hang with it. They tend to look a little bit sad.
So that's how
Yeah, in the middle of the summer, but actually they will recover as you head into autumn, and I think they'll pick up again.
Okay. Well, that's encouraging, because I was concerned and I was thinking, if the aphids have really gone in on the growing points, is that going to really, knock the plant back? Of course, the aphids have all gone now.
Yes, they have. So I think, what you do is when you like pinching something out, you take out the hormone that drives it, the apical hormone that drives the plant up, wants to get up to the light. You take that, and what happens is it triggers other hormones. So hopefully that's what's going to happen with your plant.
Okay, well, I will be observing. The other thing that's happened about perennial veg is I put in some Chinese artichoke, and they've got a very pretty sort of leaf and flower on. They look a little bit like a nettle, and quite a pretty little purple flower. Now, somebody told me the other day that they rather wish they'd never put them in because they spread everywhere. So I'm rethinking, Chris, and I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to dig them up quite rapidly, not worry about this year's harvest, and put them in pots, because I really don't want some kind of invasion on my veg plot. But I just wonder, are there other things that we need to be a little bit careful of? And there's obviously mint and things.
Yeah.
But I'm just wondering about that, especially with the trend towards perennial veg.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I'm not maybe the best place to talk about this because of my allotment it was not touched for so long. If I put perennial veg in, it just soon fills with with pernicious weeds. You see, that would be my main bit of caution with perennial veg. But you're right, things like you've described, the artichoke, it will spread everywhere. They're quite profuse. A lot of stuff's edible. You can put it in the ground and it will spread. So I would definitely tread with caution. Two reasons. One is, will it spread? Will it take over? Will it knock out ground you want to use for other crops? And the other one is, have you got bindweed and perennial and pernicious weeds already in the allotment, and will they establish in those perennial vegetables? So you have to kind of consider two things, I think. So
it's interesting you say that, because we had this conversation, you and I, a little while back about a shrubbery, and I've got an area in my garden where I just want sort of shrubs, and it's large enough space that they can really do their thing. And I said to you, it's going to be really simple. I'm going to have, my 8 or 9 shrubs and, maybe a few bulbs in the spring. And you said the trouble with managing a shrubbery is if you've got pernicious weeds, which I do have, I have bindweed and bramble really badly in my garden, then they will take over. And you're absolutely right. Straight up the back of my wonderful viburnum, I've just got this blanket of bindweed. Now I've taken it off, but this is the issue also with perennial veg. You're saying with your allotment that you're sowing annual veg each year, so obviously you're managing that site and therefore you can keep on top of things. Perennial veg presents the same issue.
Yeah, it does. Even like I've got a beautiful pollinator border on the side of I've talked about it quite often with salvias and all these lovely plants that flower and they're covered in bees. But I look at it by July and it's full of bindweed as well.
Yes.
Because I'm not removing that bindweed. It's in the soil and it just keeps coming back. So it's you can manage it. It's just quite a lot of labour involved in it. And that's the thing. In an ideal world, you'd shade it out basically, like your shrubbery. You'd fill out, and then the bindweed. Bindweed's got the advantage because it can climb up to the light. But on the whole, you want to shade out those pernicious weeds, I think, if you can.
Yeah. Okay. So you mentioned to me that you've been cropping already. So what have been your most successful crops?
I had some broad beans last night and a bean salad, which was just as well, and I had big old beans as well. I had some. You gifted me some French beans. Remember the months? Yeah, I cropped them last week. Purple coloured beans, and I had them in a salad as well. And I've cropped a load of potatoes, Charlotte. And I've had those. I had those a couple of nights ago. And then I've also tomatoes are coming off. I'm also looking at not far away from my first aubergines. I'm drowning in courgettes, so I'm trying to find different ways to cook them, which is quite interesting. I'm going to go for some. I think I'm going to make some cakes. I've done some soups and stuff. They're not the most tasteful things, so you have to kind of be creative with them. But I've got more than I could deal with. Cucumbers I've got coming out my ears, and they're just so good because of the heat we've had. They're so sweet. They're absolutely and very thirst quenching. I kind of munch on quite a lot when I'm on the site, just as instead of a drink of water. So this is really, it's going to, from now till the first frost, I will be cropping these plants. Yeah.
Well, this is where I start to feel a bit inadequate. You know, I had my 5 goals at the beginning of the season, some of which I never even quite got in. So I didn't ever get the sweet corn in, but there's always next year. I didn't get the parsnips in, but there's always next year. But the leafy crops and the beans and the potatoes have done pretty well. And the one thing I did want to mention was this year I had a handful, and when I say a handful, it's probably millions of seeds in your hand of amaranth, which is also known as callaloo. It's a wonderful leafy crop. The seed is pink, a beautiful pink colour, and it's like pink sand.
Yeah.
And I just scattered it and I sowed it in the middle of my tripod. When I say tripod, there's certainly more than 3 canes going up. I've got about 8 or 9 canes, so it's quite a wide circle. And I was just conscious that there was going to be bare soil in the middle if I didn't sow something. So I scattered the amaranth, and it just is brilliant. It's flourishing now. It's not flowering yet. You can eat the flowers, you can eat the leaves, you can even eat seeds. But actually, I'm really growing it for the leaves because they're like a spinach. You can throw them into curries, into soups. You can have them in salad, although they're not so good raw, especially when they get a bit bigger. But they are a brilliant cooker. You know, you can put them into omelettes. So that's been a joy, like a whole new discovery. And yeah, like you, beans have been brilliant this year. And again, it kind of restores your faith a bit, doesn't it, when you go out and harvest things?
Yeah, that's what you do it all for. That's why you get up early in the morning and go and water. And when we say it all the time, to me, it's all about taste. It's all about the flavours, really, especially from the heritage varieties. They just taste so much better. And you compare them to during the winter where I'm eating more stuff out of shops. It's quite incredible, the difference. It really is. And I don't regret for a second all the effort it takes once I get them on the plate, really. And also then you become more creative about what you're cooking. You're more engaged in that. And so it's a win-win all round, without a doubt, yeah.
It is. And of course, as you're taking things off, then what are you putting in their place?
Well, that's the thing. You start, like I literally took out 100 plus onions the other day, and I've taken out some amazing garlic this year. I was astounded by it. But obviously you get holes starting to appear, and I don't like to see bare ground. So I'm second waving. I started last month, and I'm still carrying on with that. So the thing, crops I could discard you like spinach and stuff. You've got to remember, we've still got 10, maybe 12 weeks left of the growing season. That's enough for radish. That's enough for leafy crops. That's enough for mazuma. It's enough for carrot even. You get them up there. So there's lots of stuff you can still be growing. So my advice would be is to keep filling those gaps, really. And if you're not going to do that, if you're not looking at food crops, then you can obviously put green manure down just to protect the integrity of the soil. I'm quite interested on the allotment side how most people approach it, because what they do is they you've got sort of get to Easter and everyone goes, yeah, it's spring. They turn up on the site, they plant everything, and then they don't do anything after that. They'll then crop it, sort of this time, and then just these holes appear everywhere.
Yeah, it's sort of one hit.
Yeah, and then once the first frost come or the light degrade, the days decrease, you don't see them again to the following spring. Whereas actually you can roll with that site much, much longer.
And it's more fun as well.
Yeah. I think it depends how, obviously a time is everything as a factor for everybody.
Yeah,
but I think it's very much what's playing an influence is a limited knowledge of the fact you can roll it further, that you can have a second wave. I've got volunteers in one of the places I work. They were quite shocked I was sowing now. And that shows you, who's talking about second waves and people sowing into gaps. And maybe this information needs to be got out there more.
And also just continuing to tell people that actually growing from seed is the way to go. It's not expensive.
Yes.
You haven't got much to lose. If you've got a space, then sow some seeds. Seed is meant to be sown.
Yeah, it is. And it's the most satisfying way to grow plants in my book.
Yeah. Can we just talk a little bit about kind of hygiene and the kind of discipline needed just to make sure that your plot is free of disease as much as possible? What are you observing at the moment in terms of that time of year where perhaps some of the moulds start appearing?
Yeah, the mildew, certainly. You'll be certainly on my broad beans, which they're finished cropping now, really, but you can see the starts of mildews on those. Certainly courgettes, you'll get mildews. I'll be amazed if you haven't got mildew courgette leaf. So again, it's observation. As I'm watering, I'm picking that off, basically. That's what you want to be doing. At the end of the season, it's quite important because a lot of fungus will overwinter in the soil, as we discussed earlier, as scrota, as a body of, and then we explode into life in the spring. So you want to be removing any dead leaves around the plants, that kind of stuff. And certainly any infections, keep your plants healthy. The DDD rule we discussed many times comes into play very much at this time of year.
Yeah, dead,
disease and
dying. So anything that's looking a little bit yellow, anything that's gone over, okay, take it out. And anything in particular you're looking forward to in August?
Yeah, I just think this is the time of the year, and it certainly accounts for what I've been up to this year. I want to just enjoy it. You know what I mean? I've been working so hard on it, and there's something incredibly satisfying about this month because you're reaping the rewards of your work, And actually, I've got into the habit with my good lady of meeting her and getting her to come down and bring a couple of bottles of lager and a bit of sandwich and a few bits and bobs to sit in the allotment of an evening because you're now looking at your work and you can graze and pick stuff, and this is the time to enjoy it. It really is. It's the time to enjoy it.
This month, I'm joined by garden designer, broadcaster and author Juliet Sargeant. Juliet has just released her first book in collaboration with the Royal Botanic Gardens Kew. It's called Start with Soil. She and I spoke about the impact of soil degradation across the world and how gardeners can take charge of their own soil health with at-home testing. And we also explored how sometimes we gardeners are working against the natural makeup and the life that thrives in our own soils. First of all, we want to very much talk about your book, which is a really essential handbook, I would say, for all of us at the moment who are beginning to really get hold of this message that we really need to look after our soils. And the book is called Start with Soil. I'd like to understand what motivated you to write the book in the first place. What was worrying you that you felt you needed to set this out for us?
Well, I've had a little bit of a sort of light bulb moment over the last few years. Of course, I've been gardening for many years and enjoying my plants and vegetables. And it sounds weird, really, but I haven't really thought that much about soil. I've been so focused on producing beautiful flowers and growing delicious vegetables. And really, I've just seen the soil as a means to an end. But then I went to visit my extended family in Tanzania, and they live on an island in Lake Victoria, and the soil is very sandy. And when I went to visit them, they said that their crops were failing. They're subsistence farmers, so they depend on the food that they grow. Unlike me, they can't just pop to Sainsbury's if the carrots aren't very good. So they really depend on their soil, and their crops have been failing year on year, and they didn't know why. So I tested tested the soil, sent a sample off to good old RHS. They tested the soil for me, and we discovered that really it was very low in nutrients and had almost no organic matter. And that really got me thinking and exploring the whole issue of soil degradation globally. But then as I delved into the research, I discovered that it's a problem in the UK. I mean, who knew that our soil is being degraded and under threat as well? So I wanted to write a book that would give people the tools, really, knowledge and tools to be able to think about their own soil at home in their own gardens.
Soil degradation is in the press at the moment. You know, we're aware of it. You know, we're talking about soil health a lot more than perhaps we ever have. Is it really a new problem?
I think farming practices have changed over the decades. So if we think about what's going on in the production of our food, the food that the farmers produce for us, there has been a shift in those practices towards growing the mass production of single crops and mechanization and reliance on chemicals and fertilizers. So I think those are probably three of the big changes that have happened, I suppose, over a lifetime, over my lifetime. But also, I think our gardening practices, on the one hand, we're very traditional in the way that we garden. But on the other hand, we too, I think, as home gardeners have become quite reliant on buying chemicals for the garden. And even, dare I say, organic gardeners are in the habit of wanting to change the soil, possibly rather than working with what we've got. So I think our gardening practices might well have something to do with degradation of soil in our own gardens. I think that's a question that I would like to put to home gardeners. How much are we thinking about what's going on in our own gardens, our own gardening practices, and whether we're really focusing on the health of the soil in the same way as we focus on the health of our plants?
Can we just go back to the subsistence farmers in Tanzania that you were talking about, who are now experiencing crop failure? I'm imagining that those are small-scale farms. My assumption is that subsistence farming is more diverse and a little bit better for the soil, but you are saying that even in that context, the soil is depleting. So why do we think that is?
Well, in this particular circumstance, on the island of Ukerewe, their soil is very sandy. And I did a little bit of research, but back in the 1970s, I found a paper written where they tested the soil on Ukerewe and found it to be low in boron, which apparently is a symptom of sandy soil, presumably because the rain is just washing the nutrients through. And so it was low in boron. So this is quite a long-standing problem as far as boron is concerned on Ukerewe, which I found to be, quite interesting. But when we tested the soil and found very little organic matter, that set me thinking about their practices on the farm. And they really are not composting, they're not adding organic matter back into the soil. And this is just purely supposition on my part, but I thought, well, surely once there was a knowledge that was a good thing. Surely back in the day, people knew that adding organic matter is a good thing to do to the soil. And I just wondered whether they've become too reliant on fertilizers and so have in a sense lost the habit of that good husbandry of a soil.
So we think probably a change in farming practice, even at subsistence level. How much would you also say that changing weather patterns are having an effect on our soils?
Well, certainly when I speak to my family in Tanzania, the weather patterns have changed completely over my lifetime. When we used to say to the family, when shall we come and see you? They would say, well, the rains will come, on this date at 2:00, and then it'll dry up on this date at 1:00. And it was just so reliable. But now they have no idea when the rains are coming, if they're coming, how long it will rain for. And they are obviously used to planting particular crops, and that's the food that they eat. But they're now having to think, well, can we still grow cassava, and will we have enough rain for the maize? So it's affecting their whole lifestyle And of course, they don't have the benefits that we have of being able to just look online or find out from experts what the best crops are for their situation. So there's a lot of obvious anxiety and trying to understand what's going on and what to do about it.
So we know around the world that the effects of climate change are really being felt now. And the effects of drought or heavy rainfall, rising temperatures can manifest themselves in so many ways. How do you see that the soil is being affected?
Well, certainly when I went further south to the island of Zanzibar, which is surrounded by sea, I was really amazed that they were saying the rising water levels of the sea were already affecting their rice crops. And not in the way that I'd anticipated, because I think of rising sea levels as sort of flooding in from the coast, maybe houses, people having to move their houses further inland. But they were saying that because the sea level's rising, the water table on the island is rising. And so their crops are becoming salinated. The salt is coming up through the soil and meeting the roots of the rice. And they're losing their crops from salination of the rising sea levels, which is something, I just never even thought about. And it's happening now. It's happening today. Again, I always think of rising sea levels as something that's going to be, in the future sometime if we don't address it. But it's happening now.
Can we just talk a little bit about how amazing soil is and perhaps even how much we take it for granted? I mean, this is an extraordinary whole world beneath our feet, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm so sort of excited by having discovered, late to the game, I know, but having discovered soil and this world, as you say, world beneath our feet, and also discovered the body of science. With my science background, I find it endlessly fascinating what the scientists are doing to open up this world and increase our knowledge. And they still know so little about it. There's so much more to discover. It's wonderful.
I mean, we've all been mesmerised by plants. That's why we're all gardeners. And we've not really perhaps taken the opportunity to be so mesmerised by soil because it's not so easy to observe, is it? It's as simple as that. It comes down to observation. But as you started to delve in, tell us some of the things that have really amazed you.
I think it's that symbiotic relationship between all the organisms within the sort of ecosystem that has really blown my mind. So the way that plants interact with the soil and then the various mini beasts and fungi and bacteria all work together for mutual benefit. And if one of them is knocked off kilter, usually by the actions of mankind, that has an effect on everything else. So it's just this beautifully finely balanced ecosystem that we really are basically unaware of, and it's going on all the time. And I even extend it up to the atmosphere and the sun. So as far as I'm concerned, the soil ecosystem encompasses the air and the sun, and then sort of all the animals within that. So as far as I'm concerned, the soil ecosystem is basically the planet and everything living on it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then this exchange, almost this kind of deal is made between soil and the sun via plants.
Yes. So the vast majority of our nutrients come from the soil. But of course, we don't eat soil. We eat plants. So those nutrients are taken up by the plants. We then eat the plants. And all our energy comes from the sun. But again, how do we get that energy? We get the energy because the plants, through photosynthesis, take the sun's energy, and then we eat the plants and we get that energy. So the goodness of the soil and the energy from the sun are mediated through the plants, and that's how we get them.
The thing that's lovely about your book is that it is so accessible and it isn't overly scientific, which for somebody who's qualified as a medical doctor is an extraordinary achievement, I would say, because that's what was needed, I think, to explain things in a way that where people can get excited about it and get on board and do what they can. So if we were to say, right, my new resolution from tomorrow is to start to think about my soil and observe my soil and look after my soil, what's the first thing that you would suggest that somebody did in that circumstance?
As you say, I think it all starts with observation. I think as gardeners, we're very busy doing, and sometimes it's good to just sit back and watch what's going on in our gardens and watch what nature is doing. So I do think starting with observing your soil, look at it, how it feels, how moist it is, what happens during the seasons with the weather to your soil, and also, of course, what plants are growing happily, either naturally as weeds in your soil, or the plants that you've planted, which ones are thriving, which ones aren't so happy. And you can learn a lot by that observation. But then when you do want to take action in your garden, I think the first thing is to think about what your aim is as a gardener, because I think there's a difference between what we do when we want to create an ornamental garden and what we do when we want to create a vegetable garden, because I think for creating vegetables, sort of large, tasty, nutritious vegetables, you do need what we've traditionally understood to be a good soil with lots of organic matter holding on to moisture, holding on to nutrients. But when you want to garden to create an ornamental garden, I would argue that perhaps we don't need to fiddle about with the soil in the way that we traditionally have.
That's a really interesting point, because we are very much ones for thinking, right, I need a freely draining area. I need to dig some grit in because I'm going to create an alpine bed. So off I go to the garden centre to buy my bag of grit and to buy my sharp sand. And I speak as somebody who has done this. You know, I do think I would love to have an alpine area over there. What I need to do is go and completely alter the natural makeup of the soil. And I have never really thought about it. I have thought, well, no, it's good. I'm creating a habitat of sorts for things that like alpine plants. But actually, I've done quite a lot of tampering that I perhaps didn't need to. And I could have probably created something really exciting in a pot if I'd wanted to do that and not actually fiddled about with the soil. My own garden is clay soil. It's really fertile. It's been well looked after for decades. So things grow well in it. But I do have patches where it's depleted. And I want to talk a little bit about that in a minute. But I like this. I'd really like to explore this idea of intervention for the sake of ornament and whether we really should be doing it.
I know it's a difficult one, because we all love a traditional British garden, you know, lupins, delphiniums, peonies. I mean, who doesn't love that? But those sort of classically beautiful gardens do need a particular kind of soil, do need a rich, crumbly, fertile loam. And I think with climate change, those sort of gardens are struggling. And we're starting to think, well, you know, what do we do? How do we keep our delphiniums and our lupins happy through hot summers and sort of devastatingly windy or wet winters? So I do think that there's something to be said for, again, observing. I'm all into the observation, observing what's going on in your local landscape, because of course that landscape out in is thriving perfectly well on the soil that there is around your home without your help, dare I say it.
And even that's, so I guess, checking out if you're right in the middle of a city, that's checking out what weeds, you know, are surviving and little sidings and little patches of land and trying to see what is growing on those, I suppose, yes?
Yes, I definitely include urbanscape in that as well. You know, what's growing on the roundabout, or as you say, on the weedy corner, or in your local park, or definitely. And I've always had this sense that if we all hanker after a particular look, then isn't life going to be a little bit boring? Aren't our gardens going to be sort of homogenous across geography? And I really think that there's something in learning to love your local look, your local landscape, the plants that will thrive happily. And if you do that, then your garden can be beautiful with the soil that you've got. You don't have to be fiddling about with it. So I think we've got the message, right plant, right place, but possibly not thinking enough about the native soil.
I think we're great ones for deciding what our soil is like. without really knowing. We think, our soil's rubbish, or, that actually our soil's quite good. But we don't actually know what we mean by that. So I'm really interested in some of your thoughts around how can we, on a Saturday afternoon, go and really assess our soil. What sort of tests would you suggest we did?
So there are loads of tests of increasing complexity, but there are also some really easy ones that you can try at home. The first fun one, particularly if you've got children or people who are young at heart in your home, is the plant your pants test.
We did plant your pants at Ryton, I have to say. Great fun. So yes, just explain that.
So it's an indirect measure of the biological activity of your soil, where you take a pair of cotton pants, or actually it can be any piece of organic cotton, and you bury it in the soil and just leave it there for 6 weeks and then dig it up. The idea being that if your soil has lots going on, bacteria and nematodes and creepy crawlies all working away, they will have, within the space of about 6 weeks, disintegrated your pants in that time. But if there's not a lot going on in your soil and it's pretty dead, then the pants will come out in pristine condition.
So good pants is bad.
Exactly. Good pants is bad. I like that.
Okay. And if you don't want to hang around 6 weeks and you want to get more of an instant idea and start to make plans off the back of that, what kind of tests could you do?
There's a really useful and simple test called the Slake test, which is a measure of the structure of your soil and how well it binds together. Soil particles, individual soil particles, are clumped together in what's called aggregates, soil aggregates. And amazingly, they're stuck together with biological glues, which are created by worms and slugs, you can imagine that, or bacteria, creepy crawlies in the soil ooze these biological glues, which then stick the particles together in little aggregates. And because you've got aggregates within the soil which are slightly larger than the individual particles, they then trap little pockets of air between them. So a sort of well-aerated soil with a good structure will be a soil that has these aggregates. Now, back to the Slake test. The Slake test is where you fashion a little basket, a wire basket, out of a little bit of chicken wire. The holes in the wire need to be about 1 centimetre or 0.5 centimetre across. And then you hang that basket in a jar of water and pop a little clump of soil in the basket. And then just watch how long it takes for the soil to disintegrate in the water in the jam jar. Now, a soil with poor structure will quickly disintegrate and dissolve and collapse. Your basket will be empty and the soil will be in the bottom of the water of the jam jar. But if your soil has a good structure, it will hold its own in that basket for, I can't remember the exact time, but for a few hours, and hold its structure there in the water.
So if it is a sandy soil, then it will just fall straight through the chicken wire onto the bottom of the jar. That makes a lot of sense. So if I have done a Slake test and I've ended up with a lot of particles at the bottom of my jam jar and not a lot left in the metal basket, what does that tell me?
So it could be that you have a loamy soil which should actually have a lovely structure to it, but for some reason it's become degraded, it's lost its structure, and so it's just dissolved into the water. Or it could be that you have a naturally sandy soil which has just run, as you can imagine, has just run through the mesh into the bottom. And the question, I think, is, if you've got the sandy soil, is that necessarily a problem? Could it just be that that's the natural soil of your area? If you've got a degraded loam, then that might well be a problem, and you might well want to take some action to improve that soil and bring it back to health. So it's really understanding what the natural soil is in your area and deciding whether what you've got in your garden has a problem or not.
Okay. So it's not automatically a problem. And if it is the natural soil in your area, then you need to go with that, is your suggestion.
That's my suggestion, controversial as it might be.
Well, I can see why it would make sense in terms of soil health, because if you're in a sandy soil area, and and that is the natural conditions of the local area, then the more you interfere with that, actually, the worse it's going to be for the world beneath our feet.
Yes. So I don't know enough about it, and I'm not sure whether the scientists yet know enough about it. But you can imagine that if we are changing the soil, we're changing the environment for the animals and microbes that inhabit that soil. So you can imagine that that might not be a good thing.
It's really tricky, isn't it? Because in a gardening context, obviously we want to succeed with our growing, particularly if we're food growing. And we do have a mindset that actually says, well, you know, there's absolutely nothing wrong with putting my homegrown compost into my sandy soil. But actually, in some ways, does come back to really thinking about those plants that thrive in that kind of setting. And if your compost is made from those plants, then you are indeed in a closed loop, perfectly natural, soil promoting activity. But if you're actually potentially buying in organic matter to bulk up that sandy soil, then that really possibly is an interference too far, when actually the number one consideration is the health of the soil in the first place. And if you've ended up with a sandy soil, it doesn't mean it's an unhealthy soil if you're in a sandy area.
Exactly. And I think you're right that a closed loop system where you're feeding back into your soil the plants that have grown in your soil, that seems a sort of safer place to be than bringing in alien soils, alien composts. I would like to stress, though, that I think that food growing is a different kettle of fish to ornamental growing, because if you are growing food to feed your family, then you will need a nutritious, moisture retentive soil for most food crops. It's the ornamental side of things that I'm saying perhaps we could be thinking more about, really thinking about right plant, right place, right soil as well.
So what prompted you to write the book was a real sense that this is a global problem, but actually you felt that we could take action in our own gardens that might be a positive contribution towards restoring soils. Can you give us a summary of what it is we could do to help?
Yeah, I feel very strongly that we as gardeners, whether you have a large plot or a small plot or you're growing on a balcony, it's such an opportunity to contribute to the mitigation of climate change. And if you're gardening in the ground, an opportunity to really look after that piece of soil in your garden, which is amazingly unique. It's like no other patch of ground. Your garden is unique, has unique conditions. So it's a wonderful opportunity to contribute to mitigation. So I would say that if you're wanting to look after your soil, there are a few really simple things that you can do. Definitely covering the soil and protecting it from the elements. So for protecting it from being blown away, protecting it from too much impact, like physical impact of rain on the soil, and also protecting it by not digging it unless you need to, are really important. So if you protect the surface of your soil with a mulch, that's a really great thing to do. That mulch could be your own garden compost, or if you did need to bring things in, it could be ornamental bark or proprietary compost. But protecting the surface of your soil is really important, and digging as little as possible is really important. And then when you're watering, if you do need to water, being careful about the structure of your soil when you water. So water gently, because soil is amazingly delicate. So water gently and don't sort of pound the soil with your hose pipe. We're encouraged to water at the base of the plant, and that's absolutely right. Not just sort of sprinkle willy-nilly all over the place, but water at the base of the plant. But the danger of doing that is that you're just pounding the soil, so water gently at the base of the plant.
You mention in the book raised bed as a solution, and also a hugelkultur as well. And I just wonder if we could just think about those of our listeners who've are wholly gardening in pots, or needing to wholly garden in raised beds. So what would be your advice if somebody said, okay, well, that's fine, but I need to do everything in pots. So where do I start?
So you'll need to have a growing medium, of course, and you have a couple of choices. It's a good idea within a container or a raised bed to have some loam, some actual soil, as opposed to just compost. So a good mix of loam or soil and compost, organic matter, is a good way to go to get good crops or good flowers. When it comes to the loam or the soil, you have a couple of choices. I really don't know which is the best for each of your situations. So you need to make your own choice, but you can either buy real soil. There are companies that sell real soil, and of course that is harvested from a field or a building site somewhere and brought to your local garden centre. Or you can buy manufactured soil, where they basically mix up sand and a bit of clay and a bit of organic matter and make soil for you to grow in. Now, my experience is that manufactured soil is often quite low in organic matter and quite low in nutrients. So when we use manufactured soil, we add in organic matter to it. So I think those are the choices: manufactured soil with organic matter added in, or real soil. And there are pros and cons to each.
I think what I found so inspiring about this chat is I feel now I can almost see what's happening underneath my feet and below the plants. And it's made me want to observe my garden much more closely. But I think on a bigger level, there's a wider message here for all of us who garden, and anybody who's thinking about starting to garden, about just how fundamental soil is to life, to all of us. And that makes our mission as gardeners actually, quite important in a way, and not to overblow that or overstate it. But we started this chat talking about a global problem. And of course, as in so many cases, it comes down to actually a very, very local solution.
Yes, absolutely. And it's that interconnectedness, really, that I find very inspiring, that there's the interconnectedness of the soil connected to the plants, connected to the microorganisms, way up into the atmosphere and the sun. And we are wrapped up in that, and our gardens are wrapped up in that. And then, so that's like a sort of vertical interconnectedness up to the sun. But then there's this horizontal interconnectedness that all our little plots of land all make a difference, because there is only so much land on the planet, and each piece of land is so important. And if you have the privilege of gardening on land, then you can make a difference. Your little plot is part of that interconnectedness.
Juliet, thank you so much. It's been brilliant. What a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. Time now for some of your questions. I'm here with Dr. Anton Rosenfeld and Chris Collins. Hello to both of you.
Hi, Fiona.
Hello.
So our first question is all around banana peel. Okay, we're not going to slip on it. We're going to find out more. I've heard that banana peel water can be used as a fertiliser on flowering or fruiting tomato and pepper plants. Would you recommend this? I'm concerned that non-organic banana skins contain chemicals that may be harmful to the crops. And that's from Philip. Well, good question, Philip. It is quite popular advice, this. We do see this dotted around in places. So, Anton, first of all, have you ever used banana peel water?
Personally, I haven't done it myself, but I've met lots of other people that have done it. I don't think it does any harm. Basically, if you're going to put any piece of vegetative matter in liquid, it will release nutrients. I think you've got to be careful it doesn't sort of ferment as well, because then it could release other things which aren't so good for the plants. But banana skins, they will have nitrogen in them. Often people think that the bananas have got quite a lot of potassium in them, so that's why they're touted as being good for tomatoes in particular. particular because they need a lot for fruiting.
Okay.
Like a lot of these things, I haven't seen a lot of scientific work done on it. I did scour the internet and I found one piece of work that was done in Indonesia, and it did seem to have some positive results. So I think there probably is something in it. As to whether it's the best thing, I mean, we know a lot more about nettles and comfreys, and they are in much more sort of abundance in your garden, really. So I would think they would be a better thing to use.
Of course, bananas are usually quite badly sprayed. I mean, Chris, you have experienced that, haven't you?
Yes, so I was working in Cameroon. We used to have some primates stay with us, and we used to go and get bananas. And I won't mention the name of the company, but they used to spray aerially in a little sort of plane and come over, and the whole place absolutely reeked. It's probably the most unorganic place you could imagine. So I assume that if you want organic bananas, there'll be some form of sticker or some sort of indication that they've been grown organically. I agree with Anton completely. There's no harm if it's an organic, and obviously it's a natural thing, so there's bound to be minerals in it. I don't think it'll come anywhere near good comfrey liquid feed or good seaweed liquid feed. So I think a banana's better chopped up, put in a compost bin and broken down and used as a mulch or as a usual compost. I think it's where it'd be more useful.
Okay, on to another question now, which is another piece of advice that we quite often hear about, and that's using washing up liquid to control pests in your garden. So here's the question. It's from Amy. Thanks, Amy. I recently read an article which claimed washing up liquid can help to get rid of moss. I remember from childhood, though, that it also irritated worms, bringing them to the surface of the grass. Is this advisable? Is the effect on worms so bad? And how would you get rid of unwanted moss? Okay, Anton, let's debunk the washing up liquid myth in the first place.
So, yeah, this is probably one of the most common things we hear about people dealing with aphids is they use washing up liquid on them. And there is some truth in it because an aphid has got a sort of waxy layer and the washing up liquid strips that off and the aphid dehydrates. The only problem with washing up liquid is it's a very blunt tool. We don't know how much we're putting onto the plant for a start. So often you can end up actually stripping all the wax off the leaves of your plants and killing your plant as well. Also, a lot of washing up liquids, probably the majority of them are derived from petrochemicals, so they're not going to break down, so you're sort of going to end up with those persisting detergents in your gardens, which isn't going to be good for your soil.
What about an eco washing up liquid?
So that's going to break down more quickly, but it's still got that problem that you don't know how much you're putting on. So although this actually sounds slightly counterintuitive, I would actually go for an organic insecticide that's been made from plant oils or soap-based insecticide because they've been tested. They know exactly the right dose to be putting on. I would go for the thing that's made for the job.
Okay, that's dealing with aphids, which, as we know, is quite a common use of soapy water being sprayed onto garden plants. What about Amy's question, which is around moss? She's obviously needing to get rid of some moss in her lawn or wanting to get rid of some moss in her lawn. Chris, what would you say about using washing up liquid on your lawn?
I don't think it'd make any difference at all, to be honest with you. I think if you've got moss in your lawn, it's a drainage issue. It means it's just sitting wet. I mean, there might be several reasons for that. It might be because you're shady. It might be because you've got heavy soil like a clay, which just keeps the water, holds onto the water. But if you want rid of it, it's a drainage issue. You need to just do some basic groundsmanship, really, get a sward going. And that's just some scarification, which is basically taking the thatch, the dead material out. Obviously, that'll build up of that you get underneath the grass and underneath the moss will help keep moisture and encourage moss to grow further. If you take that out, if you rake that out with a lawn rake and then just spike it, get a border fork, a decent fork, and make some holes that you could put a top dress on it. I'd probably do that in the autumn and then again in the spring. And then oversow with some grass seed, probably some fescues and some beds, which are native grass species. If you find that you're in a shady, clay, wet area, don't bother with the lawn, do something else with it. I'd think about maybe planting something different, maybe a woodland floor planting or something like that, because there's no point fighting the tide if the conditions aren't right for a grass sward.
Yeah, I mean, I love moss. So as far as I'm concerned, actually having a mossy area is quite magical. So there is also something about embracing what you
there is. I mean, it depends what you're using it for as well, doesn't it? I mean, it's like if you've got kids out wanting to sit on the lawn and stuff like that, then you might make a bit more of an effort to have a sward or kick a ball about. So it depends what you're using it for. If you just happen to look at it and see it, like you say, it's quite enchanting, isn't it? Moss and the sort.
Yes.
Then that's your thing. That's good. I think it's all options, but I don't think fairy liquid comes into play on any of this.
Okay, so it's quite interesting, isn't it? We've talked about banana skins. We've talked about washing up liquids. Both of these, you could kind of think these are sort of gardener's myths, or perhaps they're shortcuts or hacks. X. And sometimes we see these things kind of circulating on social media. There's lots of advice on the net. I suppose what we would want to make the point is, we love to hear about things. We love to push the boundaries. We love to try things out. That's what gardeners do. But on the other hand, there's a lot of advice out there that's not so great. What would you say to people, Chris, if they are told to try a certain thing and somebody tells them it's definitely the answer?
Well, I suppose in a way, gardening is all about experimentation.
Yeah.
I think any good gardener will say their garden is part growing plants and part experiment, because you do play around with it. But there is obviously, depends what nature you're doing of. It's professionally. If I'm professionally gardening, then I'm trained a certain way and I focus in on the things that have been proved to be successful in the past. Good example of that is Bocking 14. A person who set this charity up spent a lot of time finding out about that plant and what it did scientifically and what it could do in the garden. So I tend to fall back on my training and what I've done over the years. That's not to say, though, you can't experiment a bit. I'd always be nervous of listening to people on social media looking for clicks. Okay, so talk to an expert, talk to us, talk to an organisation with experts in it. The people who do it for a job, who go out and do it every day and have got a track record of being able to grow plants successfully and garden successfully. They're the people you want to be speaking to, really.
Yeah. Anton, any thoughts about this?
Yeah, I think Chris is right, really. If it's something on Instagram that promises the earth, then it's probably too good to be true. I also like the idea that gardeners are always experimenting. I mean, the way our whole organisation was formed was Lawrence Hills really wanted to put some of the science behind what were perhaps considered myths of organic growing. He wanted to actually try them out. So just be a bit critical when you watch stuff on YouTube. Some people do some really good stuff. They're experienced gardeners. If they tried one thing against another and done a fair comparison, then that's really could be quite valid. A lot of people have got quite a bit of experience, but if it's just some hack and they just seems to be like the answer to everything, then it probably is too good to be true.
And if you become a member of Garden Organic, then if you've got questions, you can email us and our advice team will give you a tailor-made answer. And of course, we are all for experimentation. And in fact, each year we run experiments that gardeners take part in. Hundreds and hundreds of gardeners take part in our experiments. This year we're doing one all about peas, something called the Carlin pea. It's fun, it's interesting, but more importantly, it gives us data so that actually when we give out advice, it's evidence-backed. So without further ado, let's carry on with a couple more questions. We've got one here all about no dig, which often comes in actually, but this is a specific question around compacted soil. I happen to know that Dr. Anton Rosenfeld has a PhD in compacted soil. So we've got absolutely the right person to answer this question. So it's from Claire, and she says, can you advise me what to do about compacted soil in raised beds? I grow veg in a 45 centimetre high raised bed with good quality soil. I've been using the no-dig method for a few years now. I overwinter with green manure and then I top up with garden compost in the spring. However, the soil is pretty compacted this year. What should I do? I think I'm going to have to dig it this autumn to loosen it up. Right, over to you, Anton. What's no-dig? Why do we need it? What should Claire do in this instance?
Okay, so a very brief introduction to no-dig, because I'm sure a lot of people are aware of it already. It's a method of growing where you don't turn over or disturb the soil. You usually end up putting a layer of organic matter and topping that up on the soil each year. Often you put a mulch on there to stop the weeds as well, and the plants grow to that layer of organic matter, and you rely on the worms sort of gradually mixing that organic matter into your soil rather than you having to dig it. You're really sort of mimicking a forest floor where the leaves would be sort of falling from the trees onto the soil and the worms taking it down. That's exactly what happens in nature. The reason we do it is because soils build up a real sort of intricate structure with lots of life in there. And each time you sort of stir that all up with a fork, the soil's going to have to start again, basically. Also, from a point of view of sort of carbon emissions as well, every time that you stir up the soil, that encourages a lot of the breakdown of the organic matter. So basically, your organic matter is getting broken down into carbon dioxide every time you stir up the soil. So that's one of the reasons in farming why a lot of our soils have become degraded, because we've just over-cultivated them so much that we've broken down that organic matter, and they're pretty devoid of life.
There's so much more we know now than we did know. And I think from what I can gather, gardeners are very much on board with the idea of no dig for lots of good reasons. And, we want to encourage that as much as possible. But if you've got a raised bed, it's going to be a bit tricky, isn't it?
I don't think it is, because, I've got raised beds which I do no dig at home, and almost find it easier in a way because you've got that structure for adding that sort of helps to contain the organic matter. So, I think they're really well suited to raised beds. Just to answer your question, you mentioned that soil is compacted. You perhaps need a little bit more information whether is it compacted on the surface? Has it got a sort of pan on it, or is it lower down underneath where she's been adding the organic matter? There are ways of getting around both of those. I personally would go with growing a green manure for both of them. A lot of the green manures have got very deep tap roots, particularly alfalfa, chicory. They all got really deep roots which can break through those sort of hard compacted layers. And also things like grazing rye has got a sort of fine root system which will help to break up the soil as well. So if you've got the patience, I think you can easily solve it without having to dig it over.
Do you think times have changed a bit on all this, Chris?
Oh, absolutely. It's interesting because, when I started out, if we wanted to do this, we'd have double dug it, basically. So basically, you take down the spade's head down and then you fork in your compost. So you got 2 spades down, really, and that's how you broke up.
You wouldn't do that now, though, would you?
No, you would. And the thing is, it's interesting because I actually love the action of digging. I just do. I really enjoy doing it. But we know, like Anton rightly says, we know much more about the science of soil and what's in it and what it does. And so we don't really want to interfere. Nature does it best. We don't want to interfere with that process, really. You want that to carry on. And it's quite interesting that when I've taken over ground that's been very weedy and I've dug it over, I've noticed what happens is you're just bringing more weed seed up to the surface. So there's actually, if you leave it alone, all that weed seed stays under the surface and you don't have so much of a problem with it. Yeah. The problem I suppose most people might have is we're not very patient these days. So we get a plot or a raised bed and we want it to operate. We want to grow in it straight away. And that's when maybe digging might come in because it's instant. Yeah. And that's what happens. So my advice would be, and this is what I've done on a few of my own sites, is to, if you want to get going, then dig it once and then try not to leave it alone after that. You might find also dropping a borehole in might help, because what happens with things like clay, there's a lot of clay in the soil, the particles are very small and they can wash through with watering and then they lock together, they form a pan. So you've just dropping a borehole in and see if you've got that going on, a compaction problem below the surface might also give you some indication of what's happening.
It is worth saying that it's absolutely the right time of year to be sowing green manure. So Claire, if she wants to crack on right now, that's what she needs to do. Yeah. That'll set her fair for the spring. So moving on to our final question. It's about onion white rot, which is one of those phrases that strikes fear into the heart of food growers, I'm afraid. So Mike has written in and said, white rot started to show in my onions for a couple of years. Do you have any advice on prevention apart from the bog standard of not growing alliums for 7 or 8 years? Right. Okay. Anton, first of all, what's white rot? How do you identify it?
Okay. So white rot is a fungus which particularly attacks things in the allium family. So it'll go for onions, garlic, chives, leeks, all those sort of onion crops. The easiest way to recognize it is you see the sort of fluffy white mold actually right underneath the base, particularly of onions. But the other symptoms you tend to see are the sort of yellowing of the leaves and the plant sort of rotting off, and it can kill plants quite quickly. The main horrible thing about it is you also sometimes notice these little black things which are called sclerotia, and that's a sort of resting phase of the fungus, and they can survive in the soil for up to about 20 years. So once you've introduced it, it really does stick around for a long time, and that's why people dread it so much, I think.
Okay. How widespread is it?
It is reasonably common, unfortunately. I think there was a report that said about sort of 15% of the onion crop is lost through white rot each year. So it is a pretty bad problem. It is mostly soil-borne and spread through sort of matter rather than spreading through the air.
So we've said once you've got it, I'm afraid that's not good news. But what could we be doing to prevent it in the first place?
The main thing is being careful through rotation. If you're going to be growing onions too often, then that will increase your chances of white rot taking hold if a small amount got in. But once you've got it, the sort of standard sort of 4 or 5 year rotation of GOTS, it's not going to be enough because the onion white rot will still be lurking there next time onions come round.
Okay. All right. That is a bit depressing. Has there been any research into it that might be a source of hope?
Yeah, there definitely has. So there's a person called Professor Ralph Noble who used to be based at, well, it used to be called the National Vegetable Research Centre. It's now Warwick University in Wellesbourne. And he spent about sort of 15 years looking at how to use composted onion waste against white rot. So you might think that's the worst thing possible to do because you're putting more sort of onion waste on a plot that's already infected. But what it does is it actually tricks the fungus into sort of sporulating early, and then it doesn't complete its life cycle. So you're almost giving it like a food that it can't properly eat, and it sort of starves the fungus of all its reserves. He's done that in conjunction with using another fungus called trichoderma, which sort of competes against it as well. So those two things together, he's managed to sort of work quite well against onion white rot.
Because presumably it's a major issue in agriculture.
It is, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, perhaps there is a cure on the horizon, but Mike, at the moment, I'm afraid, in a kind of back garden context, if you've got it, you need to stop growing alliums. So on that note, thank you for all that fantastic information. Really, really fascinating this month. Thanks to both Anton and Chris. See you next time.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.
That's all we've got time for this month. Thanks so much to Chris and Anton for your help with this month's questions. And thanks again to Juliet Sargeant for all her wisdom. You can get her book, Start With Soil, at all major online book retailers. Thanks too to Kevin MacLeod for the music. And we'll see you next time.